very much, Sanjay. You may have noticed that two gentlemen have joined me at the top table, so Paul Hayward is here and Sam Bacon, which is great news. It's not such great news for me because I'm now going to have to talk about the bill in front of somebody that knows infinitely more than I do, but less than how we do. So just for my first slide, I am just going to read out I guess the explanation of the bill as it appears within the bill. So the immigration bill is to make provision about immigration law, to limit or otherwise make provision about access to services, facilities and employment by reference to immigration status, to make provision about marriage and civil partnership involving certain foreign nationals and for connected purposes. Well, that's crystal clear, isn't it? I've got a lot from that, so I'm hoping that I've delved into it and I'll be able to give you a bit of an overview of what that actually means in layman's terms. I got a bit carried away with the colourful slides at the beginning, and we don't hit the bill till slide 7, so I'm probably going to zip through the first 7 quite quickly. I thought just by way of background, the immigration bill was introduced into the House of Commons on the 10th of October 2013. It's still, I believe, sitting in the House of Commons in its third reading and yet to be passed to the House of Lords. However, we are expecting the bill to come in and to receive royal assent in sometime in the spring, so pretty soon. So it's looking like it's definitely going through. Why is it necessary? Well, whilst the government want to continue to attract the brightest and the best into the UK, they also want to make it clear to illegal immigrants that they're not welcome to stay and that we'd like them to leave. And the bill has been designed to promote that ideology, I guess. To encourage those who have overstayed to leave and to make it difficult for people who don't have the right to stay to secure access to services they would normally need. The bill's got 3 main themes. The first is basically making it easier for the Home Office to remove people by streamlining the removal process and the appeals process. Secondly, there's a tighter control on Article 8. Article 8 is all about individuals' right to private life in the UK, and unfortunately I have to admit it has been much abused in recent years, so they're looking at tightening regulations on Article 8. And thirdly, which is probably the most exciting area for most people in this room, is limiting the access to services for migrants, to such an extent that a legal immigrant would pretty much have no access to many services, including NHS, holding a driving licence, renting flats, opening a bank account, so it puts quite a lot of limits on them. The bill also clamps down on sham marriages, which we hear a lot about. It tightens the regulations for the immigration advisory sector, which I guess is us. It enables immigration advisors who don't meet the Office of the Immigration Services Commissioner's guidelines to be shut down, which is good for you guys. It means you're going to be properly represented. You won't have to take pot luck. I'm assuming you're with us already. So you're in a good place. And then finally, as an introduction of exit checks, which I think is fantastic, and looking at bringing in embarkation checks. I've worked in immigration for 22 years, and when I was younger, embarkation checks were key. You could hit a button and run a full report of an individual's travel both in and out of the UK, which is incredibly useful. Find out A, who's still in the UK, and B, when they left. So hopefully this data can then be used properly. So at what stage is it? It's still waiting to go through, but we are expecting it to go through without too many problems. I thought it might be worth just spending a few minutes talking about what net migration is. We've probably all heard the term used. Mr Cameron quite publicly voiced his intention to reduce net migration from hundreds of thousands to tens of thousands a couple of years ago, and we've seen a number of changes to the immigration laws brought into force to make that happen, I guess. Net migration is basically the number of people coming into the UK minus those obviously leaving the UK. Pretty simple, but I don't know if you knew that the number of people coming into the UK also includes all those British nationals that found it too hot in Australia and are now coming home. It includes all the students coming for a year or more, and it includes all the overseas migrants who have maybe been on a short assignment abroad and now they're coming back into the UK on a long-term basis. Equally, those exiting the UK are not just British nationals and EEA nationals, but they're also migrants who've been in the UK studying, and that's them just going home at the end of their studies. So the figures are a little confused at best. Net migration is pretty much made up of a poll of a passenger survey. So if you like, I believe a couple of hundred people are trained up. They stand at the ports of entry at the airports, the Eurotunnel, with their little clipboard with maybe 10 questions to ask those passengers leaving and those coming into the UK, the purpose of their visit, how long they're coming for, and if they're leaving, how much money they spent, so that we can keep a record of the stats and decide who we'd like to come into the UK. So there's obviously great scope for error in those statistics based on who's stopping to answer the questions. But we've used those statistics since 1961, and since 2009 the survey covers 300,000 people a year, so it's pretty wide-reaching. Basically, the statistics are showing us that Mr. Cameron hasn't succeeded, and that net migration is actually up, as you can see from the chart. It's increased by 15,000 on the last year. So for the year ending June 2013, the net migration figure was 182,000 more people coming into the UK than leaving. So this chart pretty much is showing you the main reasons people migrate to the UK. I don't think it's going to come as a surprise. It's pretty much to work in the UK and to study in the UK. And the graph shows how the changes in immigration policy can impact on those figures. Obviously there's a sharp dip in the number of students coming into the UK, possibly because nearly 600 colleges have been shut over the last few years due to changes to the sponsor licence regulations for Tier 4 sponsors. So also there, it has just gone up again, but there has been a bit of a dip in Tier 2 migrants coming in, not least because of the skills criteria being increased from NQF level 3, which is sort of admin level almost, to NQF level 6, which is for specialist or management level roles. So there has actually been, I'm just going to read this because I'm not sure what statistically significant means, but there's been a statistically significant increase in citizens arriving for work reasons from the EU 15, which is what we probably learned at school as being the EU countries, France, Germany, Spain, Belgium, that sort of, and there's actually been a drop from outside of the EU from people coming in. So the government's changes to Tier 2 and the immigration regulations, not least family immigration, have seemed to have an impact. There's a drop from 242,000 people coming in, it's 242,000 people coming into the UK, down from 282,000 the previous year. So there is, I think, widely acknowledged link between how immigration is portrayed in the media and the public perception of the issue, which therefore affects policy change. So this graph I'm just going to quickly talk about. Oxford University have run a survey where they gauged how people viewed immigration. Was immigration a big problem for Britain? And in 1996, pretty much, leadership of the top 10 newspapers, pretty much everyone said only about 5% of people thought immigration was the main issue facing Britain. If you jump forward 7 years, rather unsurprisingly, the Daily Express readers now think it's really quite critical. 50% of them think that immigration is the main issue facing Britain, and yet just about 15% of the Guardian readership see it as a problem. So you can see there the way that immigration is portrayed, I think we know quite well, and the Daily Express is very different to the Guardian, and it affects opinion. The next slide again is pretty much chosen because I like the colours, so it's just to show you how the headlines it's all very hostile. The terminology used to describe immigrants isn't particularly nice. It's often illegal, bogus, a very negative portrayal of immigration in the UK and a little bit biased, so that is affecting public opinion. The UK government have actually encouraged that almost. I don't know how many of you are addicted to the UK Border Force programme that's on Sky Television, but the Home Office originally, or government, promoted coverage by funding that programme with a £400,000 fee fund to pay for the programme to be launched. That was a bit controversial, so eventually Sky gave the money back, but they are very involved in portraying immigration as being a bad thing. So just skipping through. Do forgive me, my presentation, I've been a bit having to speed it up quite a lot. So managing illegal immigration is what this immigration bill is all about. It's really to put illegal immigrants off staying in the UK, and there's been a number of routes the Home Office have taken to discourage illegal immigrants. Probably the most famous is the Go Home vans that trawled certain areas of London in June last year. I think you've probably seen them, quite horrific. They were withdrawn after a week. Although the Advertising Standards Agency actually found that a campaign wasn't in fact offensive and irresponsible, and they closed down the campaign simply because the arrest statistics displayed on the van were incorrect, which is a little bit alarming. The Home Office is also outsourcing their management of illegal immigration. As you probably know, sponsors, they've outsourced quite a lot of responsibility to you, because you're now expected to monitor your staff, you're expected to notice when their visas are expiring, and help them do something about it. They've also officially outsourced to Capita PLC. Capita have won the contract to chase up all those overstays, chase up all those illegal immigrants, and chase up all those people they think are still in the UK that have in fact left to a tune of 30 million. So over 4 years they have the capacity to earn £30 million based on a set fee per individual that leaves the UK. So the Home Office are going to quite extraordinary measures to encourage people to leave. The immigration bill, so we've finally got to slide 7, so this is what it's all about. The immigration bill's coming in, and it's made up of, I guess, 6 different parts. I'm going to touch on each part just briefly, so you're feeling a bit more informed, and then Sam will take over quickly. So part 1, just briefly, is removals and other powers. Now this is not the most exciting part. Part 3 is the most exciting part, so again I'll skip through this. The Home Office is streamlining the removals process. So currently, when they refuse somebody's visa and they look to remove them, they have to refuse the visa and offer the right of appeal normally against the refusal, and then they serve the removal notice on them and they offer them the right of appeal against that. So the person has 2 opportunities to appeal. Often most people take up both opportunities, and that can obviously extend the time they're in the UK and cost the Home Office a lot of money. I think quite sensibly they're putting the 2 together. Might not be that sensible, maybe Sam will correct me, but I think it's not the bad as the worst idea. So they're going to refuse and look to remove, so there'll be 1 right of appeal based on both refusals. They're going to allow immigration officers to enter people's homes and search for travel documents. There's only people that they think are breaking immigration regulations, and they detain them. So if they have someone in detention, they can pop over to their house and have a rummage around to try and find their passport. They are restricting the ability of immigration detainees to apply for bail. I'm not going to go into this because hopefully you haven't ever come across this and you don't have anybody who's at issue in detention. So I think I'll leave that. And they're just going to ensure that legislation is established to ensure that public interest is properly considered. So Article 8, I think it's in the press a lot. And we'll find perhaps individuals accused of various terrorist acts using Article 8 as a way of staying in the UK. So the Home Office is, or the government is proposing to tighten up those regulations so there's less abuse. Okay, so this is moderately more interesting. So appeals, at the moment, it's pretty, you pretty much get the right of appeal if you have a refusal. So if you make an application before your visa expires and it's refused, it's pretty likely, in most cases, you'll have the right of appeal. And appeals can take years, even for straightforward appeals, to be heard. So if you get refused today, you might wait until June next year to have your appeal heard, during which time you're in the UK, you're allowed to stay. So the government have looked at ways of limiting the right of appeal, and rather than give it too much thought, they've just basically ditched the 17 chances of appealing and introduced 4. So in the past you had 17 ways of appealing against refusal, and they've now changed that and brought in just 4 ways. And the 4 main ways are linked really to asylum, human rights, and whether an EU application has been made. Again, not that relevant. Has anybody had any dealings with appeals? Is anybody unduly concerned? Hopefully not, you're all being well managed. Excellent. And then basically what they're saying is, rather than having this right to appeal, they're going to bring in an administrative review. Now, at the outside of the UK, the entry clearance officers already offer an administrative review. If you think they've made a mistake, you can let them know and they'll reconsider it. So the same is going to happen with the Home Office. If you think a caseworker's made a mistake, then you can ask for an admin review, and the same caseworker or their manager will decide whether or not they made a mistake the first time round. So it's not exactly, it's not exactly. So the slide shows the number of appeals that the Home Office loses. So about 50% of their cases, the decisions are wrong, or the immigration judges are wrong. So it's a little alarming that those 50% of the won't have recourse to appeal against the decision. Okay, this is the fun bit. Immigration bill, access to services. So at the moment, long-term immigrants are coming into the UK for more than 6 months. They have quite a lot of flexibility. They enjoy quite a lot of access to various services, such as the NHS. They find it quite easy to rent property. Obviously, it's quite tricky to get a mortgage if you're a temporary migrant, so most of them are renting. Well, the proposal is to severely restrict an illegal immigrant's ability to enjoy those services. They're going to look at introducing a requirement for private landlords to check into an individual's status. So much like as sponsors and employers, you're expected to do a right-to-work check. The landlord is expected to perform a similar check. They're expected to look at similar sorts of documents and satisfy themselves that that person in front of them is lawfully here, and they can expect it to be stay lawfully in the UK for the duration of the tenancy. So that's pretty similar. You can understand how that would work. But on top of that, the landlord is also checking that any adult staying at the property is also lawfully present in the UK. So it's an interviewing process there to determine who exactly that individual they're letting to is planning to let come into their home. Even if perhaps a visitor from abroad, anybody that's actually physically present in that property is supposed to be a legal migrant. If the landlord is found not to make the relevant checks, he hasn't got evidence that the person's legally here on his records, much like your right to work check, and that person is found to be illegal or their visa lapses, then there's a £3,000 fine per adult in the property. So it's not going to encourage private landlords to rent to individuals who have visas, to individuals who have maybe foreign sounding names, to individuals that speak with an accent. It's inviting discrimination, unfortunately, I believe. So it's not a great development. As HR professionals, you're likely to be asked by your migrants for more documentation to show that yes, you're still employed in that role, that your visa is still relevant, and it's likely to create more work for you as well. In addition, it's possibly going to increase in cost. Letting agents are expected to take responsibility for these checks. It's unlikely the average landlord is going to bother to read the codes of practice that go along with these guidelines. So it's expected that letting agents will take responsibility and take over the burden, and somehow they're going to be miraculously trained in how to look at visas and how to assess them. That's going to potentially increase in costs and fees for letting agents, and I think the assessment is about 36 million pounds will be pumped into the letting agent industry as a result. So the other key area is the introduction of a surcharge on temporary migrants to cover the NHS. So currently there's a bit of furore in the press that the migrants come over, we've got health tourists, we've got people coming over 7 months pregnant and to use maternity services at the NHS, and it's to put a stop to that. They're basically saying that any migrant coming into the UK lawfully will be charged an additional £200 per person on top of their normal visa fee to come into the UK as a surcharge to use the NHS. So it will be a mandatory fee. It means that if your average family of 4 come over, you're looking at an additional cost on top of the visa fee of £800 per family. Most of them come for 3 years, maybe for long term. That's nearly £2,500 per family just for that 3-year period. You've got lots of people, no doubt, in the UK that you're sponsoring. Perhaps you're covering all their costs as well. When they come to apply for an extension, the same fee will be introduced at the extension stage. Again, £200 per individual. So are we going to start targeting single people? Are we going to stop offering jobs to those overseas because we can't find anybody in the UK? It's unlikely. It's just a way of introducing some more money for the pot, I guess. So does that mean that for £200, it's like the cheapest private medical cover ever, I get complete access to the NHS? That's not too bad, is it really? Well, it wouldn't be if, along with the immigration bill, the Department of Health have introduced some changes which aren't so well publicised, and they're saying that unless you're ordinarily resident in the UK, and that means have you got indefinite leave to remain, are you British or European exercising treaty rights, then you can only have free access to the GP. So even though you've paid your £200, you're only going to get access to a GP. You can't use A&E, emergency services, and there's restrictions on other services such as the dentist and other providers. So that's kind of being snuck in. Doesn't have to, I don't think, go through Parliament. So these changes are going to sort of run along with the immigration bill and make the UK an even more hostile environment to illegal immigrants and possibly migrants as a whole. So good luck encouraging them to come in here and work. So residential tenancies is one of the biggest areas of impact, and we've already touched on the discrimination of rogue landlords and how that can be a bit of a problem. We've talked about the increase in letting agents' charges and then potentially the difficulty in arranging accommodation. Lots of people come over on house hunting trips, and we have some relocation companies in the UK where they're responsible for enhancing their clients' experience, taking around some lovely potential residences. So will the landlords be so happy to rent to them if they're standing there with a visit visa coming over for their house hunting trips? So there's potentially going to be issues coming over for that journey as well. I'm going to skip through this slide because I'm mindful of the time and we've already talked about quite a lot of it. Changes on top of the NHS is also the prohibiting making banks check. So currently, obviously, there are a certain amount of checks there to open a bank account. I think the UK is notorious for being difficult to open a current account. It's quite hard to give them your money, but they're actually going to make it even harder, and they now want banks to be responsible for checking the visa status. So it's going to be even tougher to open that account for your migrants when they come over to the UK. There's no indication of any particular charges or fines for banks, but presumably it will be written into their code of practice so that they're more likely to follow it. Okay, the Home Office has estimated that currently the health tourists are costing NHS between 70 million and 300 million per year. So it's hoping that the surcharge will generate at least 200 million and obviously plug that gap with that. Another key area to the immigration bill is changes to the civil penalty scheme. It's fantastic news. They're abolishing that annual check. You know that annual check that you all do so well, where you look at the passports and you sign the pages and every year you put it on top of each and it's a complete pain gathering all the paperwork together. Well, they've recognised that that is a bit of a pain and people generally don't do it, so they're abolishing the annual check, which is great. What isn't great, though, is that you're more likely to lose sight of the visa expiry. You're more likely to not double-check the status of your migrant workers, and you're more likely to run risk of not having the correct documentation showing they've got the right to work in the UK, which is bad because they're increasing the fine from 10,000 to 20,000. They're limiting the rights of appeal against a decision to fine you. So currently it's pretty easy to overturn, in most cases, the £10,000 fine if you have most of your documents on your records. In the future, unless you have the exact set of documentation the Home Office is looking for in the correct format, then you're pretty much going to be paying that £20,000. So for some employers in the room who have a significant number of migrant workers, not necessarily sponsored, just here under Tier 1 or students, if you're not doing the correct checks and you're caught out, it could be significantly cost far more. There are going to be some changes to the employer checking service. We've got a company that I think checks 6,000 migrants routinely in the room today, and we are told the employer checking service will improve and that you get a quicker response, which is good. Okay, so just coming to a close very soon. Not as relevant, but still relevant. Some companies sponsor their migrants to come over to the UK, and it turns out, just as you're about to assign a certificate of sponsorship, that their spouse is British, and you think, oh, we'll do that instead, it's a better visa for them. But there's some changes. Marriage isn't popular with the Home Office either, because of the number of sham marriages that are claiming to occur. The government believe between 4,000 and 10,000 sham marriages occur every year, and they're forever looking at quite well documented ways of limiting that. So currently, their new idea is that when you want to marry, you have to give, for anybody that's got married, you have to give 15 days notice. So it's quite a long time if you're excited. We're certainly not going to become LA anytime, or Las Vegas anytime soon. We're not going to have any short, sharp weddings. They're proposing to extend the 15 days to 28 days, and that 28 days will give the registrar time to report to the Home Office that a migrant is trying to get married in the UK, and then the Home Office will investigate that migrant status and decide whether or not they're lawfully able to do so. If they don't have time, or if they haven't quite got to it because there's now a backlog of about 4,000 cases, then they'll extend that notice period to 70 days. So you'll have to wait 2.5 months to get married, which if your visa's expiring obviously isn't great news. And then lastly, this is the oversight. This is the provision to shut down bad immigration representatives. So the OISC, Office of the Immigration Services Commissioner, does take lots of complaints against representatives. There are nearly 1,000 registered representatives, so we're in quite a busy marketplace, and lots of them unfortunately are unfit to practice. In recent years it's been quite easy to get your registration with the OIC. They've only recently changed their code, where it's actually quite tricky to pass their tests. It's quite tricky now to get your level 1 or level 2 as an advisor, but we've got 7,000 immigration advisors out there that perhaps shouldn't be offering advice at the current time. So that hopefully will improve things. They're also going to bring in the miscellaneous embarkation checks I talked about, where they're going to willy-nilly, I guess, check people leaving the UK, check whether they've overstayed, so it'll improve their stats in terms of net migration, and hopefully maybe move towards spending a bit of money on checking everyone leaving the UK. Finally, that's going to provide some clarity on the Home Office's ability to charge you. The fees are going up quite a lot. They're going up every year, and been seeing a move to dependent visas costing as much as the main applicants. So when you apply from abroad, your visa might cost £494. Your wife's visa will also cost £494 eligible each child. In the UK, dependents pay significantly less than the main applicant, but slowly they're creeping up the dependent costs, which obviously is going to make them quite a lot of money, because main applicants are charged quite a lot. So that sort of brings me to a quick close.